Greetings, book lovers everywhere, and welcome to Eat Train Talks. I'm your host, Eat Train. I'm a 13-year-old literacy advocate, podcast host, and book lover. I'm super excited for today's chat because whenever my guest writes a new book, you know I am about to read it. I'm going to pre-order it. I'm going to be so excited, and I'm sure all of you are as well. So my guest is a special and powerful writer. He writes everything from unicorn rescues to historical fiction, fantasy, magic galore. He's a masterful weaver of tales, a magician who creates worlds that come to life in the pages of his stories, and he transports us to faraway lands and ancient times. I'm really excited to welcome author extraordinaire, creator of Max and the House of Spies, an instant New York Times bestseller, and The Inquisitor's Tale, a Newbery honoree. And he has written so many other amazing stories. This is the one and only Adam Gitwitz. Welcome to Eat Train Talks, Adam.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here.
Well, I'm excited that you're here as well, and we all are, in fact. So, you've lived such an interesting life, and your stories really reflect it. I cannot wait to find out more about your writing journey. I'm sure we all cannot wait. And without further ado, let's jump in.
Great.
So, let's start off with Max and the House of Spies, your newest book. So, Max and the House of Spies, for those who don't know, is set during World War II and the times surrounding it. World War II is a topic I find extremely interesting, and through your portrayal of Max and his navigation of both being Jewish and having to leave his family in Nazi Germany, we get a glimpse into his complicated life. I knew very little about the Kindertransports before reading Max and the House of Spies, and for those who don't know about Kindertransports, will you talk a bit about what they are and how they impacted people's lives like Max?
Yeah, sure. So in the 1930s, the Nazis were in power in Germany. And for those of you who aren't familiar, and there are some kids out there who probably are not, the Nazis were these guys who hated pretty much everybody. They hated Jewish people, they hated non-white people, they hated gay people, and they hated disabled people, just, Russian people, Polish people. If you weren't a Nazi, they hated you. And they made life really difficult for all of those groups of people. And Jewish people were desperately trying to get out of Nazi Germany. All of those groups were. But the Jewish people were finding it very difficult to get out because all of the countries around the world, pretty much every single one said, no, you can't come here. We have too many Jewish people already,
Mm.
even the countries that didn't have any Jewish people at all. So many countries allowed a couple, a few thousand in, if that, but there were millions of Jewish people in Germany trying to get out. Finally, in 1938, after 5 years of people trying to escape, England, Great Britain, said that they would take 10,000 Jewish children, but not their parents.
Mm.
So, this organized by Germans, Jewish Germans, non-Jewish Germans, and English people. This effort to get 10,000 Jewish children out of Germany started, and they were put onto trains in Berlin that took them to a ferry, usually in Holland, and then the ferry took them from Holland to England, where they were placed with a family. Most of these kids spoke very little English, if any at all. None of them knew the families before they got there. And when they arrived in England, they had to just wait to see if their parents would join them. And unfortunately, because of the Holocaust, many of their parents did not. They did not survive, though some did. So the reason I wanted to write about the Kindertransport is because when I was growing up, one of my close family friends, a man named Michael Steinberg, was one of those children.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so when he was 10 years old, his mother put him on a train in Berlin, and that took him to a ferry in Holland that took him to England. He was placed with a family there, and he waited for 8 years, hoping to see his mother again. And he was one of the lucky ones. He did see his mother again. She came and joined him in England, and then they moved to the United States.
Just hearing the whole story again is just really powerful. And yeah, I mean, I can't imagine living in that time. I mean, we live in a world of anti-Semitism today as well, but just the sheer pain that so many felt, especially the separation, it just must have been awful.
Yeah, and I mean, honestly, today we still have that. It's not some of these people are Jewish people, right? Like
Yeah,
who moved to the United States, but there are lots of refugees all over the world, right? Leaving their
correct.
countries because of crime, because of war, and not always able to go with their families. So it's a story from 80 years ago, and it's also a story of right now.
Yeah. So Max and the House of Spies, as the title suggests, dives into the world of espionage and spies. But what I found most compelling along Max's journey was not about necessarily him being an actual spy, but how he was just labeled a spy for being German. No matter how horrible the experiences he dealt with just for being Jewish in Nazi Germany, people just thought he was a Nazi spy because he was German. And he was assumed to be helping those he hated the most, which just sounds horrible, must really hurt. So, was this a common experience, anti-Semitism and assumptions towards Jews, refugees, etc.?
Yeah, sure. And not just towards Jews, but towards any refugees or
Yeah.
any people who were from that other country, right? So there were plenty of Germans who wanted to get out of Germany because they hated the Nazis,
Hmm.
and often they were treated as enemies, and so they would be interned on a little island called Jersey, which is in the English Channel between England and France, and there was this uh, prison there, and it's a crazy place, and one day I would love to write a book about it. Maybe I will. I've just been learning about it kind of recently. You had Jewish people who had been escaping Germany, interned there, but you also had Nazis who had been imprisoned and going there. And so you had these Jews and these Nazis in jail in the same place, waiting to try to get into England. Just a really crazy thing. So that happened there in Jersey. But also you had, I think, as many people are aware, in the United States, Japanese people who had been born in Japan, but also Japanese Americans who had been here, whose families had lived here for generations, were put into internment camps that were not like concentration camps in Germany. Those were very different things, but they were large open air prisons where they were interned for the course of the war, just because they were from a different country. So there has always been, and there continues to be, a lot of fear of people who are different just because they're different.
Yeah. And what was even more sad about Japanese internment camps, more specifically, just a lot of the people lived in America their entire lives. They maybe first generation, second generation, just because they had Japanese blood in them, they were just sent there.
Yeah. Yeah. And it sort of goes to the fact that a lot of the laws in this country as well as in Europe, but I mean, just talking about the country where we live, were based on blood, like you said, on race, on who your parents or your grandparents were. And most people don't know this, but Nazi Germany created these laws, these blood laws, the Jewish laws, where you were determined whether you were Jewish if you had 1/4 Jewish blood, quote unquote. If you had one grandparent who was Jewish, then you were Jewish and subject to all of the discrimination and ultimately the imprisonment and murder that was going on in Nazi Germany. Germans didn't invent that idea. They got the idea from the United States. And in the American South, the rule wasn't you were black if you had one black grandparent. The rule was one drop. If you had, quote unquote, one drop of black blood, whatever that means. In other words, if any of your ancestors anywhere back there could be found to have been black, then you could be segregated, or you could be discriminated against, or even enslaved back in slavery days. So, unfortunately, like that, what you just talked about with Japanese, that is was a tradition, a legal tradition here in the United States, that we are finally starting to get away from, and we need to keep working to stay away from it.
Absolutely. And a little bit more about Max and House of Spies. So, what I love about historical fiction is while the stories do teach important history and make us feel deeply, entertain us, but for Max's story specifically, you added a bit of Jewish folklore, and I haven't really found that in many other historical fiction stories, or just stories in general. So, Max has two outspoken, not necessarily imaginary friends, but no, like, I mean, they're not really imaginary and they're not really friends.
Good point.
So a Dibuk named Stein and a kobold named Berg. So they're Max's companions throughout the journey, and they don't really leave Max alone, both for bad and for good. So can you share what these two, I guess, creatures are and how you came up with the idea to include these mythological figures in Max's story?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I love how you describe them. Um, So once many years ago, my editor asked me, my editor, an editor, for those of you who don't know, is like a teacher. She reads my books. She tells me what's good about them and what's bad about them. I'm actually kidding. My editor never tells me what's good about them, only what's bad about them. And eventually, when she stops coming up with bad things, then we publish it. So she reads them over and over again. And so she once asked me, um, she said, Adam, are you ever going to write a book that doesn't have a dragon in it? And I said, why? Like, why would I want to do that? So this book doesn't technically have a dragon in it, but it does have two immortal mythical creatures. Um, the reason I decided to put them in there is because I knew Max was going to be going on some very serious adventures, and he was going to fundamentally be alone, right? Going from Germany to England. And then in the sequel, because this is a duology,
Ooh,
Max in the Land of Lies is coming next, and he's
yeah.
going back to Germany. Yay! So, um, and Max is going to be in some really terrifying situations in both books, and he's going to be alone. And so I wanted him to have somebody to talk to, and I wanted those people to be funny, and I wanted that to be an opportunity for humor.
Mm,
Um, and so, mythical creatures living on his shoulders just seemed to me like a really good way of allowing us to get to know Max better through the conversations with these people. Because Max, as a kid, as a refugee, alone in this country, and then trying to become a spy, like he can't tell the truth to almost anybody. He's got all sorts of secrets he's keeping, right? Some of
right.
them are fun and exciting, and some of them are sad, but whatever they are, he's got secrets. So I wanted him to be able to talk to somebody so we could get to know him. And so these two creatures were the way I did that. And yes, so one is a kobold, and that's Berg. And kobold is actually from German mythology. Kobold is like a goblin. In fact, the word goblin is the French version of the German word kobold. And
Oh,
goblins, the idea is kobolds like live in your house or in your place of work, and they make mischief. In fact, fun fact for those of you who like words, I don't always tell people this, but I figure this is a place where we've got readers listening right now.
yeah.
Um, so you might be familiar with the word cobalt, the blue, the color blue. It's a deep blue. And it's called cobalt because it's the color of a stone. A very beautiful blue stone is called cobalt. The stone cobalt is called cobalt because when you mine cobalt, when you get it out of the earth, it releases a poisonous gas, and
Oh,
miners were getting sick and even dying while they were mining cobalt, and they blamed kobolds. So the color blue actually is named after these mythical creatures.
wow.
Yeah, that was cool.
Yeah, it
So
is.
yeah, so Berg is a kobold, and then the other one is Stein, and he's a Dybbuk. At least I pronounce it Dybbuk, but it's pronounced lots of different ways. And Stein, Dybbuks are from Jewish mythology, and they attach themselves to you and make your life miserable. So lucky for Max, he's got both a kobold and a Dybbuk making his life miserable. But I hope they actually make the book a lot more fun.
They do. Yeah. And yeah, like you said, they had the humorous aspect and they kind of Max is everything like not going for him and they just insult to injury, I guess.
Yeah, exactly right. And insult is the key because their characters were in part inspired by the Muppet Show.
Oh,
Those two guys, Waldorf and Statler, who sit up in the box and kibitz and insult everybody. I think they're very funny. So that's
they
sort
are,
of
yeah.
inspiration. Yeah.
So, along with us both loving stories, we also both have podcasts. So, you run the podcast Grim, Grimmer, Grimmest. I listened to a couple of episodes and they're fantastic. I just love how your intro lets kids know what to do if they get scared. And I just like overall, it's really entertaining. You learn a lot, it's kid friendly, which you don't often find. And it's just it's pretty high tech. I mean, you can just see everybody from his microphone, or if this is or actually if this is listening, then you might not be able to see that. Depends on later, so I'm gonna edit that out. Anyway, yeah. So it's pretty high tech. You have a sound and casting crew. And when did you first get into this podcasting world?
Yeah, so around 2018 or so, so wow, 6 years ago, I was approached by a company that no longer exists saying, "Hey, we're going to start this children's podcasting thing. They don't know children's podcasts really exist yet, but we think it's going to be a thing. Do you have any ideas? And I did have an idea. So I my first book is A Tale Dark and Grim,
Mhm.
and it's based on real scary grim fairy tales. And the reason that I wrote it, I know I'm going way back here, but you have to explain all of these things to make this make sense. The reason I wrote it is I was a teacher, and I was asked one day if I'd be willing to be a substitute librarian at my school. And I said yes. They said, "You're going to be reading stories to second graders." I said, "No problem." They said, "Tell them any story you want." I said, "Great." So I went home and I started looking around on my shelf for a good story to read to second graders. And I came across my book of the real grim fairy tales.
Hmm.
Now, I had never read them before. So I looked at it and I thought, oh, fairy tales. Those are perfect for little kids. And I opened it up to a story called Faithful Johannes. And in the story, Faithful Johannes, two children get decapitated by their
Ah.
parents. Yeah, they get their heads put back on again, so they're fine. But I read that and I was like, oh, that's interesting. Can I read that to second graders? Will I get fired? And then I thought, let's find out. So I brought the book in and I started reading to these kids. And very quickly they started to get very nervous. So I'd make a joke to calm them down, or I would warn them when something really terrifying was about to happen. And I think I did a pretty good job because by the end of the story, I looked up and every kid, well, they looked totally traumatized. So I didn't do a good job at all. But I did have one little girl come up to me afterwards and she stuck her finger in my face and she goes, "That was good." And I was like, "What?" And she goes, "You should make that into a book." And I was like, "Huh." So I went home and I wrote down that story exactly the way I told it to those kids, with all the jokes and all the warnings right in the story. And that became the first chapter of A Tale Dark and Grim. Just exactly that. So then when I'm promoting that book, A Tale Dark and Grim, and its sequels, In a Glass Grimly, The Grim Conclusion, um, I go to schools and I tell Grim Fairy Tales live. And the thing was, first of all, the stories are great. But the best part was the way the kids were reacting to the stories. And only I was getting to see that. No one else in the world, other than teachers in the school, were getting to see how kids were reacting, what they were saying. It was so fun and funny. And so when this podcast company came to me and said, "Hey, do you have an idea for a podcast?" I was like, "Yeah." And yes, what we do is expensive and high tech and not easy. So we are working to make a fifth season. Um,
Woo.
uh, yes. And what happens in the podcast is I tell a fairy tale live to kids, and you get to hear them react to me. You also get to, it's like full cast, so you get to hear, music and actors, but you also just get to hear the kids react, which is my favorite part. So you get to hear them laugh, you get to hear them scream occasionally. I love making children scream when I can. And you also hear them heckle me, which is not my favorite part. But that's when it's most people's favorite part, just not mine. So that's like, in one of the early episodes, I was talking about, I was the hero in the story met a blue dwarf. And when he met the blue dwarf, this girl interrupts me while I'm talking, and she goes, "You mean a Smurf?" And I'm like, "No, it's not a Smurf. It's a blue dwarf." And she goes, "Yeah, I'm pretty sure that's a Smurf." And I was like, "It's not a Smurf." So then, but for the rest of the episode, every time the blue dwarf comes up, the kids go, "It's a Smurf." And I'm like, "It's not a Smurf." So anyway, if you'd like to hear the kids drive me crazy, you can listen to Grimmest.
I mean, that's our job to drive adults crazy.
Yeah, I know. It's great. You guys are really good at it. I hate it.
Yeah, I mean, if anybody wants to check out Grimmer, and Grimmest, that'll be in the description of this, and probably on Adam's socials and everything.
Yeah,
Maybe.
you could just also just Google it.
Yeah,
Grimmest. Comes right up.
that works too. Forgot
Yeah.
about that Google thing. Yeah, it's nice. It's a nice touch to
Yeah, yeah, it's
yeah,
effective.
yeah. So let's move to the Inquisitor's Tale, which is right here. And also it's kind of like this question is both about for the Inquisitor's Tale, but also kind of dabbles into your other books as well. So, animals play a big role in The Inquisitor's Tale, specifically a greyhound named Gwenfort, and they were killed unjustly and were deemed a saint to some townspeople, then came back to life. It's a whole thing. You got to read the book. So, the greyhound accompanied Jean, your main character, and I know a lot of authors actually don't like writing stories with animals as key players, but
Hmm.
you face that challenge head on in all of your stories. Well, almost all of your stories. And I'm just curious, what do you love most about writing animals into your books?
That's a good question. I'm not sure that I intend to do that. It just keeps happening. Um,
Just in your
uh,
brain. Yeah.
yeah, well, I mean, like, first of all, there's a lot of animals in the fairy tales.
Yeah.
And so in my fairy tale books, I have a lot of animals. And Inquisitor's Tale, yeah, I mean, the story of Gwenfort, the Holy Greyhound, which you just told so effectively, I didn't make it up. I mean, there was a town in medieval France where that happened. I don't know that the greyhound came back to life, but yeah, this dog saved a baby and then died, and they venerated this dog as a saint. And that was just too crazy not to have. And everybody loves a dog. Everybody loves an
Yeah.
animal. Man, when I first wrote, so very occasionally I edit books after they have been published.
Hmm.
And one of the books that I did that for was my second book, In a Glass Grimly. I had In a Glass Grimly being my second book. The second book I think is the hardest book because the first book, A Tale Dark and Grim, was a success. And then everyone was like, great, do exactly the same thing, but make it completely different. And I'm like, how am I supposed to do that? So I'm very nervous about it in A Glass Grimly. I'm rewriting it over and over again. And so in it, I retell in the first chapter the real grim version of the Frog Prince. And in the real version of the Frog Prince, the princess does not kiss the frog.
Oh.
In the real version of the Frog Prince, she throws it against a wall trying to kill it. And then it becomes a prince, and they get married and live happily ever after, which makes no sense. But in my version of it, she throws it against the wall. He loses a leg. I don't even remember why I had him lose a leg. And after that chapter, I said, I know this wasn't bloody enough for you, but don't worry, it'll get bloodier. Well, the fan mail that I got, sorry, not fan mail, the hate mail that I got from kids in the first weeks of this book coming out, even before the book came out, the brilliant author Jacqueline Woodson, her daughter read the book in an early draft or
Mhm.
like a advanced reader's copy. And she, among many other children, wrote to me and were like, don't hurt animals. And I was like, wait a minute. In my first book, the two children get their heads cut off. And you're complaining about the frog losing a leg? But yes, they were. They were so mad. And so I went back. I didn't take out the frog part, but I did say after the frog was injured, don't worry, he'll be okay. He'll be better than okay. He'll be awesome. And after that, I never got any angry fan mail about it. So kids really do connect to animals. And so I guess when I put it in the books, that it's another way of connecting to my readers. Though it's not why I put it in. It just I think tends to work.
Wow. I mean, that's that, like,
That was a longer answer than you expected, I guess.
no, I mean, it's not longer than I expected. It's just a really interesting story. Like, I guess you're right. Did you receive any like nice fan mail after you fixed that? Or not even about the fix, but like
Not about the fix, but yes, people were very happy that
okay, that's good.
that the frog was going to be better than all right, that he was going to be awesome.
Ooh.
Yeah.
So I found it really fascinating that you lived abroad multiple times. So you attended college, or you took a year to go to England, and you traveled through Europe as well with your wife when you were older. So when it comes to research and experiences, do you think that living abroad and just exploring the beauty of Europe, do you think that helped your writing? Like, because I know Macton House of Spies is in Europe, The Inquisitor's Tale also takes place in medieval Europe. So do you think that really added authenticity to your stories? But also, I guess to kind of counter that, do you think that imagination can be enough to write these books that take place in other lands?
That's a great question. So the answer in the first question, I mean, certainly. And I think, you know, on the plus side, travel is when you leave where you live and you go to a different culture, and it can be within your own country. We have lots of different
Mhm.
communities in our country that have different cultures. But especially when you go abroad and you see a radically different culture, um, it just you stop assuming things. You stop assuming that you understand things, and you look just a little bit harder. Your eyes are just a little bit more open. You see the world in some ways the way that a child does. Like it's, oh, everything is new. Like I didn't know any of this.
Yeah.
I think that one of the reasons that like my favorite books are kids books is because the best kids books are able to make the world seem strange again. And for me, travel helps with that. And for me, especially living in England for a year, because I spoke the language, I spoke the language in France, but not as well. But in England, you speak the language, and yet it's a totally different culture, despite the
Yeah.
fact that they speak the language. And so you're like, what? I mean, it's like living in The Hobbit. It really is. Um, and so, yeah, so I was definitely inspired by those things. Now, does that mean that you have to travel in order to write well? Definitely not. Um, there are many, many, many writers who never traveled, um, and write brilliant books. Um, but if you want to write about a place, it's really hard to write about it if you haven't been to that place. You can imagine, but there's just a level of detail, of feeling. What is the light like? What does it smell like? What is it, what are the roads like under your feet? That's really helpful to have gone if you can manage it. Um, that said, you can't always. And in that case, I mean, your imagination is a great thing, and usually nobody can tell. Um, but there is something that feels really rich when you've been to a place and you've looked at it really carefully and it's gone like deep into your body, and then you're able to, bring those emotions, those memories back out and get them on the page.
I love that answer. And I think like kind of moving to England in a sense, a bit of a follow-up. So if your books are ever published like in England, like do you actually change some of the words to like kind of be British English, or do they stay American English?
It's funny. We have done that. So the Grimm books are published in England, and they did change the words. And it worked. It worked fine. I think A Tale Dark and Grim has sold pretty well in England. Um, but strangely, I don't think for whatever reason, m children's books rarely cross the pond very well.
Mm.
Like Harry Potter, obviously great. Cross the pond was very successful. Roald Dahl, likewise. And there are some American books that do well over there. But there are a lot of really beloved English books that when I read them, I'm kind of like, really? And I think they feel that way about a lot of our books. I think a lot of it has to do with the humor. I think my sense of
Yeah.
humor only works so over there. And so also in Max and the House of Spies, the British Empire is not entirely seen as a positive thing.
Oh, yeah.
And so I'm not sure how that would go over there also. So I don't know. Yeah, we'll see. We'll see if it gets published in England.
Yeah, that's definitely something that you've got to kind of work around. I don't even know if you can work around that. Like, it's like that's a really big part of the story.
No, I don't think we would work around it. I think the question is like, do people want to hear the truth about their own history?
Yeah, and a lot of the times it's a no. Like a lot of people just don't even
So true.
a lot of people just don't even want to know the truth of the American history, everything that's gone on here. And we're all
That's
like,
so true.
America, but nobody really cares. No, well, a lot of people care, but some people they're just kind of stuck in their own minds. And
Hmm.
like with Mass and House of Spies, it opens minds. That's the point of the book.
Yeah, that's right. Thank you. And I think, I think most people, a lot of people forget that you can be critical of something that you love. That in fact, the more you love it, the more critical you should be of it. So I think in America, the United States is an incredible country that allows for amazing things, and has allowed hundreds of millions of people over the years to achieve things they never would have achieved. And also, it's done terrible stuff. And we should be able to see that so that we can make it more and more achieve its potential of what it can be.
Yeah, I love that. So moving to more about the Grimm stories, Unicorn Rescue Society. So you mentioned on your website that you were hoping to adapt them into TV shows. So I know A Tale Dark and Grim, it got its own Netflix show, which is awesome. And I'm just curious, first of all, did Unicorn Rescue Society any progress on that? And also just for adapting a book into a TV show, what's the process like? And what are kind of the pros and cons? What do you have to change? Yeah, bunch of
Yeah.
questions in one. Yeah.
It's good. Those are all great questions. So yeah, Tale Dark and Grim is on Netflix, 10 episodes, one for each chapter. Um, Unicorn Rescue Society, we're not currently working on an adaptation of that, though I'm working on adaptations of other things right now, other books. Um, it's an interesting process. It's so much fun, but also can be super frustrating. So the fun part is also the frustrating part. When I write a book, I write it alone. It's up to me. I have an editor who tells me what she doesn't like, but ultimately I have to come up with every idea in the book. And if it's in the book, it's because I wanted it in the book. I didn't make it to El Dark and Grim, the Netflix show, alone. We had 200 people working on that show.
Wow.
And so that means you get so many amazing, cool ideas that you never would have thought of when you were working alone. And it also means that you have to compromise and sometimes accept ideas or outcomes that you don't really like.
Yeah.
The other thing is, and the best thing about writing a book is, it's pretty much free. As long as you can pay your rent and eat, like the cost of writing a book is pencil and paper or a computer if you are writing on a computer. That's it. Um, so, if you buy a fancy computer, it'll cost you $1,000 and that's it. Whereas that TV show, A Taylor and Grimm, cost $15 million to make. So, which I wasn't my money, but that means
Yeah, I was about to say. I was about to say.
no, I don't have that at all. But somebody had to pay that, which means first of all that all those decisions have to go through the people who have the money, and so then you start to worry about what they think and are they going to be okay with it. But also, if you run out of money, if like things got more expensive than you expected, and that always happens, then things don't look as good as you want to because later you have to make changes like, oh, we have to make the dragon smaller, we have to. So so the great thing about working on a TV show is like there's all this money and there's all these people with great ideas. But also that's the downside of working on a TV show. And the upside of working on a book is it's just you and your imagination and whatever skill level you can bring to telling that story.
Yeah. And just that number of $15 million. And I know it's not even your money, but still, it's just must be a lot of pressure, like you said.
Yeah, don't get it wrong. Absolutely.
Yeah.
It is a lot of pressure. I mean, I like that kind of pressure. It's fun. It's exciting. I like the opportunity to try to tell a story that people really love. But
Yeah, and
yeah,
it turned out great.
thank you.
Yeah. So, my next question for you is one that I've kind of been a little bit curious about with all sorts of authors. So, as a middle schooler, I've noticed slang, which has been always changing, which can make it really hard to write into books. And
Mm.
also profanity, they're being used a lot more in middle school and even like upper elementary school settings. So, as a writer of middle grade books, what's your stance on including cursing or slang in your stories? I know,
That's interesting.
yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
I mean,
You were
I
gonna
know
say
your
something?
books are like somewhat historical or like
Right.
medieval times, so it might be a little bit like hard to intertwine. Then maybe the cursing part more.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I use plenty of slang in my books. It's just slang that's 1,000 years old or 80 years old, so it doesn't sound like slang anymore, you know? Um,
Oh, well, good golly.
yeah. Uh, yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So, um, yeah, I don't write a lot of contemporary fiction, so I don't have to worry about that. It all sounds old. And in terms of cursing, I only do it when I absolutely have to. So, for example, um, in Inquisitor's Tale, one of the main characters, William, loses his donkey. And he keeps saying, "Where is my?" And then you could guess at what he says, um, because that was a joke. I just couldn't pass it up. Um, so sometimes you just have to do that. Or for example, in A Tale Dark and Grim, uh, they are condemned to HE double hockey sticks because, that's where they go, and I have to use that language. Um, uh, but otherwise I don't. We take out any curses. Sometimes I write them in the first draft, and my editor says, "This means that thousands of schools won't be able to carry this book. Is this
True.
word that important to you?" And if I said yes, then she would let me leave it, but I don't because I want those kids to get to read that book.
Yeah. You don't want to let one curse word just kind of stop millions or thousands of kids from reading. your work.
Exactly. Exactly. It's I can't imagine a case that it's worth it except William and his lost donkey. That
I
was
mean,
worth it.
if you didn't include that joke, then I would be surprised.
Yeah, yeah.
I'd
It'd
be
be
scared.
disappointing, right? Yeah.
Yeah, very disappointed.
Yeah.
So I've asked a number of authors about their feelings on book bans, and you wrote obviously about World War II and the Nazis, they burned books. So, I mean, that might sound a lot different than what's going on, but really they correlate a lot. And there are even people who are burning books today. So I'd like you might have some thoughts on the topic of book banning. So, what do you think, like, why is it, I guess, harmful for kids not to have access to these stories, and what can we do to stop book banning?
Those are great questions. So, it's harmful. Um, well, I think about it this way. There's a wonderful book called 1984 by George Orwell.
Mhm.
And in 1984, it's usually a upper school book or an adult
Yeah,
book, but in 1984, they're creating a new dictionary, a new, it's called Newspeak, is the new language that they're creating. And the guy who runs the dictionary is friends with the main character, and he's bragging about each new edition of the dictionary. And he says, every year fewer and fewer words, and every year the range of consciousness grows smaller. In other words, they're trying to prevent people from being able to think more things. They want them to be able to think fewer things so they can control them more easily. When we ban books, when we burn books, it's exactly what we're trying to do. We want kids to be able to think of fewer things so they are easier to control. If you want a few grown-ups to be able to control what you think, I don't know what to say to you. I don't.
yeah, me neither.
And what we can do about it is we can speak up whenever it happens, in our own communities especially. If we find out about it happening, organize your friends, go down to the principal's office, go to the library, make signs, go to the school board meetings, ask the people who want to ban the books if they've read the books they're trying to ban,
Yeah,
because they almost never have. And you read them and you tell them what you thought and what was meaningful to you. And if those book bans do go through, then it is your responsibility to read those books because that's the stuff those are the books that got the good stuff in it.
yeah. Like, kids just know if a book is being banned, that means that it's a very good book most of the
Yes,
time.
exactly. Almost always.
Yeah. And yeah, I also like just how you included what kids can do because I mean, sometimes when people answer, it's what adults can do, but kids really have a say as well. We can go to
Huge
school.
amount of power. You guys have so much power when like the kids in Parkland organized against gun violence. People listened in a way that hasn't happened before. You all see the world very clearly and from a fresh perspective that can really get adults' attention.
Absolutely. Hey, he's giving us some credit, kids.
There you go.
Yeah. So, my final question, which kind of makes me sad because I've enjoyed this interview, but it's also a question that I've asked every single person I've interviewed, I think. So if you could be or meet any literary character, so you could meet your favorite author, or you could meet your favorite book character, who would it be and why?
Well, I'm afraid that I'm going to say the most common of all answers. Do you keep a chart of all of the answers to this question?
I
Because
should.
you should. I bet I'm going to say the same person that everybody says. Can I wait? Can I give a fictional and a
Yeah, you can do
nonfiction?
both. Yeah.
Okay. My fictional character is actually not from a book, so this is totally cheating. But
Okay.
it's Yoda. I would totally meet Yoda.
Yeah, that
I,
that
I
would be awesome.
I think I could learn a lot from Yoda. I mean, who couldn't? Who wouldn't?
Yeah.
And my real character, my real author is this is everybody I'm sure says this, but William Shakespeare. I would
No one's
love
actually said that.
what? Oh, they're all wrong. Okay. If I put up my answer against their answer, then they would all go, "Oh no, of course you're right. That's the person I would want to meet."
Yeah.
Because nobody wrote like Shakespeare. Nobody has written like Shakespeare since. Whatever was going on in either his brain or her brain or their brain, we don't know. Actually, Shakespeare could have been a bunch of people, probably was a bunch of people all writing together in his group, but whatever. The person or people who wrote those plays, um, used language in ways that completely changed how we not only write, but how we think. I said that thing about fewer and fewer words, and every year the range of consciousness grows smaller. Shakespeare was the exact opposite. He introduced thousands of new words into English
Yeah.
and new phrases and ways of thinking about things, which have changed the way we're able to think about the world. He created the word eyeball. I just love that. Um, so I want to meet Shakespeare and just hear what he sounds like. That's what I want.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, like you said, Shakespeare, he revolutionized the English language. And I mean, that was a good answer. Like, probably I mean, don't tell anybody else I said this, but probably some of the best answers, you know?
Well, this is public, so you got to be careful. I think everyone's gonna hear
They can hear it if they want.
it.
Yeah, but I mean, you chose obvious answers, but most people, they don't choose obvious answers. And so it's kind of like, oh, you're like the only one who does the obvious. So it becomes is unobvious a word? I can't.
Yeah, absolutely. And if it isn't, you're the new Shakespeare.
Yeah, I am the new Shakespeare. I'm not British though.
No, that's okay.
I mean, I could be British. Like,
You could, and probably they say that Shakespeare's accent was probably closer to our accent than it is to modern English accent.
oh,
He didn't sound English at all. At least he wouldn't have to our ears.
yeah. So thank you so much for taking time out of your day to talk to me today.
It
It's
was
like,
so much fun. You do a great. Your show is great. I love what you guys do, what you do on the show,
thank
and
you.
I'm honored to be on it. So thank you.
Yeah, and I'm honored that you took time out of your day. I just said that, but repeating myself, like, yeah, thank you just so much for taking time. Your answers to my questions, they were fantastic. And I mean, this is an age-old pun, Yoda man. I mean, I gotta say it.
Love it. Great. I take it.
So your tales inspire, they enchant, and they spark imaginations of readers, and not just imaginations, but they brought in so many kids to the medieval Europe, to magic, to fantasy. And I just want to thank everybody who's watching. Thank you for tuning in or listening. Thank you for tuning in. And keep on reading. But of course, by reading, of course, I mean read Adam's books. They are amazing.
Thank you.
And I cannot wait to see what you write next, Adam. And I cannot wait to see what all of you do in the future. Kids, check out Adam's stories. They're amazing. And who knows, maybe this chat will inspire you to write your own book someday. So, see you in the next one. Keep on reading. Stay safe. Bye bye, everybody. Where's the button?